The air at the Westridge Horse Fair was electric, a mix of dust, excitement, and challenge. Horses galloped, hooves pounding the earth with force, while the crowd cheered and clapped, eager for the next great spectacle. The warm sun beat down, casting long shadows across the fields, but all eyes were on the arena where the real drama was about to unfold. Shadow, a massive stallion, was the center of it all. His coat was a deep, inky black that seemed to absorb the light around him, giving him an almost supernatural aura. The beast was tethered to a post in the middle of a pen, muscles rippling beneath his glossy coat. But it wasn't his size or beauty that had earned him a reputation. It was his ferocity. He was a wild Mustang, untamed and unruly, known for bucking anyone who dared to approach him. Some said he was impossible to break, that he was the kind of horse who would break bones and crush saddles. No one had managed to tame him. The announcer's voice echoed through the fairground, a mixture of warning and challenge. He's broken bones, crushed saddles, no one stays on him. This stallion doesn't need a rider. He needs to be put down. Whoever can tame him will earn $10,000. The crowd murmured, uneasy but intrigued. No one stepped forward. After all, there were only two kinds of people who would willingly get close to a beast like Shadow, the foolish and the brave. And the few who had tried before had walked away with bruised egos and broken bodies. That was when Noah Clark appeared. He didn't walk like most of the other participants. He didn't stride with the confidence of someone accustomed to the limelight. In fact, he didn't seem to care much for the attention of the crowd at all. He was calm, his movements slow and deliberate. It's almost as if the chaos around him didn't exist. And there was something else that set him apart. He was barefoot. Noah didn't wear the usual leather boots or gloves that the other trainers wore. He was a stark contrast to the others. No fancy gear, no showy bravado, just a quiet, steady presence that cut through the noise of the crowd. He didn't carry a whip or a rope, the tools of many trainers who relied on force. Instead, he brought something much quieter, much stronger. Silence. As Noah approached the pen, his eyes locked on Shadow. The stallion, agitated and ready to fight anyone who came too close, let out a snort, eyes wide, and pawed the ground. He was a creature of pure instinct, not bound by the rules of men, and he looked at Noah with an almost predatory gaze. The crowd held its breath, watching in disbelief. Could this barefoot, calm figure really do what no one else had managed to do? Noah didn't say a word. He simply entered the pen and knelt on the ground, waiting. Waiting for what? No one could say. It wasn't an act of defiance or arrogance. It was simply a gesture of understanding, as if he knew something others didn't, as if he was inviting the horse to join him in that space. For a few tense moments, the only sound was the rhythmic pounding of Shadow's hooves as he circled Noah. The stallion snorted, flared his nostrils, and pawed the dirt, agitated by the stillness of the human who dared to approach him. The crowd murmured in disbelief, expecting chaos to erupt any moment, but it didn't. Noah remained still, breathing evenly, his eyes never leaving the horse. And then something happened, slowly, as though it were a decision he had been weighing for some time. Shadow stopped. He lowered his head, his nostrils flaring in the dusty air. The fierce, untamed stallion that had been raging against the world now stood before the quiet figure, calmed. There was a moment, a fragile one, where the chaos of the fair seemed to dissolve into a silence that echoed louder than the noise around them. Noah stood up and reached for Shadow's mane. The stallion did not flinch. There was no struggle, no violent rejection. Instead, Noah simply placed his hand on the horse's neck, steadying himself. The crowd gasped. In the next few seconds, Noah did what no one had dared to do. He mounted the stallion, bareback, no reins, no saddle. For a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The moment was surreal. The crowd had expected a brutal showdown, a struggle between man and beast, but what they saw instead was something much more extraordinary. A trust that had been built without a single word spoken. Shadow, the wild stallion, had surrendered, not to force, not to dominance, but to understanding, to quiet. He moved, not in rebellion, but with a calm that seemed to be his choice. Noah sat atop the massive horse with a calm demeanor, looking down at the crowd who stared in stunned silence. The stallion moved in a slow, steady rhythm. It was a simple, quiet dance, one that had never been seen before. As Noah guided Shadow through the pen, the crowd's disbelief turned into awe. They watched as the untouchable horse, the one no one could ride, walked calmly with a boy who had never raised a hand in anger or fear. And in that moment, something shifted in the crowd. Perhaps they had witnessed something far more profound than they could understand at that moment. It wasn't about winning the challenge. It wasn't about the prize money. It was about the quiet power that came from within. The sun had barely risen over the hills of rural Wyoming, casting long shadows across the vast open fields. The earth smelled fresh, the air cool and crisp, and the distant mountains stood like silent sentinels, watching over the land. In this place, where the horizon stretched on endlessly and the bustle of city life was a distant memory, Noah Clark had grown up. His home was a small farmhouse on the outskirts of town, nestled against the rugged backdrop of nature, where the land was untamed and the pace of life was dictated by the seasons, not the clock. Noah had always felt more at home here, in the company of animals than with people. His grandfather, an old farrier with hands calloused from years of working with horses, had raised him after Noah lost his parents in a car accident when he was just a boy. His mother and father had been well known in the town for their work with livestock. But Noah's life had taken a different turn when they passed away. The small house became quieter, and the space once filled with laughter and warmth now felt hollow. Yet his grandfather, a man of few words but infinite wisdom, had stepped in, teaching him not only how to work with animals, but how to understand them. From a young age, Noah had been different. While other children played with their friends, he spent hours with his grandfather in the barn, watching him shoe horses and mend fences. His grandfather never rushed him. He allowed him to observe, to learn at his own pace. It was during these formative years that Noah developed a unique approach to animals, one that set him apart from other ranchers and horse trainers. His method was simple, yet radical. Where others shouted, cracked whips, or used ropes to assert dominance, Noah believed in something far quieter. His approach was about listening, truly listening to the animal. He would sit with them, speak softly, and allow them to come to him, not out of fear, but out of respect. It was a practice that others mocked at first, calling it weird or unconventional. But Noah never cared. He wasn't interested in conforming to others' expectations. He was interested in understanding the animals he worked with, in finding the common ground between human and beast. Noah's method wasn't just about training. It was about forming a connection. He didn't see the animals as tools to be controlled, but as beings with their own thoughts and emotions. To him, a horse wasn't just an animal to be tamed. It was a creature that needed trust and care. And that was what Noah offered. He had always known that he was different from the other kids in town, but it wasn't until his teen years that he realized how deeply this difference ran. While others his age were navigating the tricky waters of social interactions, trying to fit in and find their place, Noah felt more at peace with the creatures around him than with his peers. They were loud, they were messy, and they didn't seem to understand the quiet beauty of simply being present in the moment. In contrast, the horses, dogs, and even the wild deer that occasionally wandered through the property seemed to understand him in ways people never could. Noah's quiet nature wasn't the result of shyness or insecurity, though. He had simply come to understand that words were often unnecessary. His grandfather had always told him, "The animals speak with their hearts, not their mouths. If you listen carefully, you'll hear them." And so Noah did. He listened to the sound of hooves against the earth, to the subtle shifts in a horse's posture, to the way a dog's ears would twitch when something caught its attention. These were the cues he relied on, not the loud commands that others used. Growing up, Noah had often been told that he would never be able to carry on the family tradition of working with horses because he didn't have the right way of doing things. His grandfather's old friends, the ranchers who lived in nearby towns, all insisted that he would never be successful without learning to break horses the proper way. They believed that horses needed to be dominated, that only by exerting control could one truly become a master of the animal. But Noah didn't believe that. He couldn't. He knew there had to be another way. His reputation spread slowly at first, mostly through whispers in town and the occasional success story from a neighbor who had seen Noah's methods firsthand. At 19, Noah wasn't the typical rancher you would expect to find in Wyoming. He wasn't flashy, he didn't show off, and he didn't try to fit into the mold that others had set for him. Instead, he worked quietly, steadily, building relationships with animals in a way that few could understand. It was a difficult road, one that often left him feeling isolated. The other ranchers laughed behind his back, calling him the boy who talks to horses. But Noah didn't mind. He didn't need their approval. He had the respect of the animals, and that was enough for him. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about proving to himself that his way could work, that there was more to animals than strength and dominance. But that didn't mean it was always easy. There were moments when Noah questioned his path, moments when he wondered if he was just fooling himself. Those doubts never lasted long, though. He'd walk outside, to the barn, or into the open fields, and the animals would remind him of why he did what he did. The way a horse would nuzzle him in greeting, or a dog would lay its head on his lap in trust. These small moments were enough to keep him going. Still, as much as Noah loved his home and his grandfather, he knew that there was more for him out there. He had dreams of working with animals in ways no one else had imagined, of finding new ways to bridge the gap between human and beast. He had felt it in his bones for years, a calling to do something bigger, something that would take him far beyond the small town of Westridge. Little did Noah know, his life was about to change forever. The Westridge Horse Fair was bustling with the energy of 1,000 horses, riders, and spectators, each more excited than the last. The stands were packed with eager faces, eyes gleaming with anticipation as the latest event began to unfold. But despite the excitement in the air, one thing overshadowed everything else: the presence of Shadow. The Stallion was a beast of legend, a name that sent shivers through anyone who had ever dared to face him. Standing in the center of the arena, Shadow's dark coat shimmered like the shadow cast by the moon, his muscles rippling under his powerful frame. The crowd hushed as the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, the moment you've all been waiting for. This is Shadow, a wild Mustang, black as night, with a spirit too wild to tame. He's been rejected by 4 ranchers and has bucked every rider who's dared to get close. No one stays on him. He's the one everyone's been talking about." There was an air of caution, even fear in the crowd. Shadow was no ordinary horse. He had earned his reputation through countless displays of defiance and violence. Those who tried to break him would leave with bruises and broken bones. Some had even tried to saddle him, only to be thrown violently to the ground. The Mustang's rage was as legendary as his strength. His eyes were fierce, his movements quick and unpredictable, and no one who had seen him in action could deny the terror he inspired. As the announcer's words faded into the murmurs of the crowd, the arena fell into a heavy silence. Everyone waited, wondering who would be brave or foolish enough to attempt to tame the untamable. And then, like a shadow cutting through the noise, Noah Clark stepped forward. He didn't seem to notice the hushed whispers that followed his every movement. He didn't care about the spectators or the challenge that lay ahead. His eyes were fixed on Shadow, who snorted and pawed at the ground, his wild, untamed energy crackling through the air. It was as though Noah's presence didn't faze the beast at all. He simply walked into the pen, calm and composed, without hesitation. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. What was this kid thinking? Barefoot, with no saddle, no whip, no rope. How could he possibly hope to tame the wildest horse in the country? Some of the more seasoned ranchers scoffed. He's going to get himself killed, one muttered under his breath. But Noah didn't hear. He didn't bring a whip or a lasso. He didn't bring any of the tools that ranchers use to force submission. Instead, Noah brought only his silence, a quiet determination that seemed to speak louder than any commands ever could. Noah stopped in the center of the pen, not moving. His body language was relaxed, but his posture was one of quiet authority. He bent down, kneeling to the ground in a gesture that seemed both reverential and humble. He didn't speak a word. His eyes never left Shadow, but he didn't approach the horse. He simply waited. The stallion, confused at first, snorted and stamped his feet, his hooves striking the dirt with force. He paced the pen, moving in tight circles, eyeing Noah with distrust. His wild eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, Noah thought he saw a flash of recognition, as if the beast could sense the quiet strength in the boy. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The crowd began to murmur, unsure of what was happening. The usual show of force didn't come. No one was shouting orders. No one was waving a rope. It was just Noah. Kneeling quietly in the dirt, his presence a stillness in the storm of chaos surrounding them. And then something extraordinary happened. Shadow, still tense and unsure, stopped in his tracks. He sniffed the air, his nostrils flaring as he slowly circled Noah. The stallion was the very embodiment of fury and defiance. But there was something about Noah's calm, steady presence that seemed to disarm him. Slowly he lowered his head, his sharp eyes still watching Noah closely. There was no growl, no snarl, just a quiet acknowledgement of the boy's stillness. Noah didn't move. He didn't try to coax the stallion any closer. He simply waited, patient and unwavering. Shadow, the beast who had sent others fleeing in fear, stood in front of him, his massive frame towering over the boy, but the anger that had driven him for so long seemed to falter. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, Noah stood up. He walked slowly toward the beast, his eyes never leaving the horses. Shadow, in turn, stopped pacing. His muscles tensed, and for a brief second it seemed like he might explode. But Noah's calm presence kept him still. Noah reached out, his hand brushing gently against Shadow's neck. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd held its collective breath, waiting for the inevitable disaster. But the disaster never came. Instead, Shadow did something that stunned everyone in the stands. He lowered his head further, his eyes softening, and allowed Noah to mount him. Bareback. No saddle. No reins. The stallion didn't fight. He didn't buck. He simply stood, still and steady, allowing Noah to settle atop him. The crowd erupted in shocked applause. This wasn't just about a boy riding a horse. It was about something far more profound. Noah Clark, the boy who listened instead of commanding, who didn't break the horse but connected with it, had done what no one else could. He had bridged the gap between man and beast, not with force, but with understanding. For the first time, Shadow, the untamable wild stallion, had been tamed. Not by domination, but by trust. And that was a victory far greater than any prize money or recognition could ever offer. The atmosphere at the Westridge Horse Fair shifted almost imperceptibly as Noah Clark mounted Shadow, the stallion who had for so long been considered untamable. The crowd, which had been murmuring and shifting in discomfort, suddenly became still. The tension in the air was thick with disbelief. Noah, the quiet boy with the unconventional methods, had done the impossible. He was riding Shadow bareback, with no ropes, no saddle, no whip. The two were as one, boy and beast, silent and composed, moving as if they had always shared this unspoken bond. Noah sat atop the black stallion with a calm that belied the ferocity of the horse beneath him. He didn't grasp at the reins. He didn't need to. The connection between them was more subtle, more profound. Noah's posture was relaxed, and Shadow, despite his turbulent past and reputation for aggression, moved with a steady rhythm, as if he had been riding with Noah for years. His hooves beat against the earth, the sound both powerful and rhythmic, but the stallion was no longer the wild force he had once been. He was controlled by a quiet trust, a trust that had been built not through dominance, but through something far more elusive, understanding. For the first time in years, Shadow didn't feel the need to fight, and that moment of calm did not just surprise the crowd. It shocked them to their core. They had come to the fair expecting chaos, the spectacle of a brutal fight between man and beast. Instead, they were witnessing something far more extraordinary. As Noah rode Shadow around the pen, his eyes never leaving the horses, the crowd began to realize that what they were seeing was something they had never expected to witness. They had expected the usual display of force, the usual performance of a trainer trying to overpower a horse. But this was different. There was no shouting. There were no ropes. There was no attempt to break the horse's will. There was only this quiet, almost reverent understanding between the two, as if they had communicated without words, as if the bond between them transcended language itself. The announcer's voice crackled through the speakers, but it was drowned out by the murmurs of the crowd, who were still in shock. Some were whispering in disbelief. Others were asking each other if they had seen what they thought they had seen. Was this real? Was it possible? Could a horse like Shadow, who had defied every rider who had ever tried to tame him, truly be calmed by the gentle presence of a young boy? Noah didn't respond to the crowd. He didn't need to. He wasn't here to prove anything. His only goal was to connect with Shadow, to let the horse know that he was not an enemy, but a companion. The stallion's powerful body moved fluidly under him, but it was a far cry from the violent, erratic movements that had once defined him. Shadow was moving with purpose now, almost as if he were choosing to move alongside Noah, not in rebellion, but in harmony. The crowd had been expecting the typical dramatic struggle, the horse bucking wildly, the trainer struggling to stay on, the desperate attempts to break the animal's spirit, but instead, they were witnessing a quiet triumph, a quiet moment of trust that no one had believed was possible. And as Noah and Shadow circled the pin together, the realization slowly began to settle in. This wasn't about breaking the horse. It was about building a connection, a relationship of trust and understanding. It was a triumph not of dominance, but of compassion. A few moments passed, and then, as if on cue, Noah guided Shadow toward the center of the pen. The horse, who had once been wild and untamable, came to a stop in front of Noah. There, in the center of the arena, with the crowd watching in stunned silence, Noah dismounted the horse. He didn't rush. There was no need to. The moment was peaceful, almost sacred. He patted Shadow's neck gently before stepping away, and the stallion stood still, his head low, his breathing steady. The crowd had witnessed something extraordinary. A horse that had once been known for its ferocity was now standing calmly in front of a boy who had tamed him. Not with force, but with understanding. The arena erupted into applause, though it was more out of awe than anything else. People jumped to their feet, their cheers a mixture of disbelief and admiration. Some clapped in silence, as if still trying to process what they had just witnessed. Others shouted in excitement, their voices filled with wonder. But it was the look on the faces of the ranchers in the stands that spoke the loudest. For years, they had believed that horses needed to be dominated. They had thought that only through brute force could a horse be tamed. But now, they were seeing something completely different. They were seeing the power of quiet strength, the power of patience and understanding. The announcer's voice broke through the noise of the crowd, still amazed. Ladies and gentlemen, what you've just seen is not just a display of skill, it's a testament to the quiet power of trust. Noah Clark has done what no one thought possible. He has tamed Shadow, The wild stallion, without force, without violence, just silence, just understanding. For a brief moment, Noah stood at the center of the arena, his gaze shifting to the crowd and then to Shadow, who was now calmly grazing by his side. The stallion had surrendered not to control, but to respect, and Noah, standing tall and proud, knew that this was not the end, it was only the beginning. As the applause faded into the distance, Noah stood still, his heart pounding, but not out of fear or excitement. It was a quiet pride, a pride in knowing that his message had been received. He had done what no one believed could be done. And in doing so, he had changed the way that the world looked at horses, and perhaps even at animals in general. This wasn't about winning a prize. This wasn't about being famous. This was about a quiet triumph over years of tradition, over the idea that strength and dominance were the only ways to succeed. Noah Clarke had proven something far more important, that the strongest force was not control, but compassion. The moment Noah Clarke dismounted from Shadow, the world outside the arena began to change. What had started as a quiet display of understanding between a young boy and a wild stallion quickly erupted into something much bigger than either of them had anticipated. The videos of Noah riding Shadow, bareback, no ropes, no saddle, it spread like wildfire across the internet. By the end of the day, the footage had gone viral, shared by millions of people who couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. The headline was simple, but striking. Horse whisperer, kid calms killer, stallion. It wasn't just a story about a boy and a horse. It was a story about defying expectations, about challenging everything people thought they knew about taming wild animals. The footage was raw, real, and undeniably powerful, and people couldn't look away. Within hours, social media was flooded with posts praising Noah for his incredible feat. Facebook groups dedicated to horse lovers and animal behaviorists were sharing the video, accompanied by shocked and amazed comments. "I've never seen anything like this before," one user posted. "This kid has a gift. He didn't break that horse. He connected with it." Another wrote, "This is proof that we don't need to dominate animals to earn their respect. We just need to listen." Noah had done the impossible, and in doing so, he had captured the world's attention. But with the praise came something else: criticism. Not everyone was impressed. In fact, some of the most vocal animal behaviorists and trainers were quick to dismiss Noah's approach as nothing more than a trick. They called it fakery, accusing him of using hidden devices or techniques to fool the audience. "No horse behaves that way naturally," one well-known trainer said in an interview. "This kid didn't tame that stallion. He manipulated the situation. The horse's calm demeanor is just part of the show." Well, others, more cautiously, raised concerns about the safety of Noah's method. "It may have worked with Shadow, but that doesn't mean it will work with every horse," they warned. "So there's a risk of teaching people that you can tame wild animals without understanding their true nature." The online debates raged on, and soon Noah found himself at the center of a storm. His social media feed became a battleground for opposing views. Some people supported him wholeheartedly, while others doubted his methods, suggesting that his calm approach was merely a fluke. "You can't teach an old dog new tricks," one critic wrote. "This is nothing more than a one-time miracle." At first, Noah tried to ignore the backlash. After all, his only goal had been to connect with Shadow, not to prove anything to anyone. But as the criticism grew louder, it became impossible for him to stay silent. The pressure mounted, and soon the boy who had once found peace in solitude began to feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. One evening, after a particularly harsh comment from an animal expert questioning his methods, Noah finally decided to speak up. He sat down at his computer, opened his social media accounts, and typed a simple message: "The horse chose me. That's all." It was brief, direct, and undeniably honest. But Noah's response, rather than calming the storm, only fueled it further. Critics piled on, calling him naive and accusing him of being too young to understand the complexities of animal behavior. They questioned his lack of formal training, his unorthodox approach, and his refusal to use the methods that had been honed and perfected by generations of experienced ranchers and trainers. But Noah didn't back down. He wasn't interested in engaging in endless arguments. His mission had never been about silencing his critics. It was about staying true to what he believed. And he believed that animals, just like people, deserved respect, understanding, and the space to express themselves in ways that didn't involve force. The more Noah thought about it, the more he realized that the backlash wasn't about him. It was about a world that had grown accustomed to seeing dominance as the only way to achieve control. It was a world that valued strength and power over compassion and understanding. And that, in Noah's mind, was the real problem. And his simple post about the horse choosing him began to echo in his mind. It wasn't just about Shadow. It was about everything that had led up to this moment. The years of quietly observing animals, the time spent learning from his grandfather, and the unspoken bond he had forged with every creature he encountered. It was about the trust that had been established, not through force or intimidation, but through patience and respect. Still, the noise continued. The criticisms didn't stop. But slowly, something incredible began to happen. More and more people began to come to Noah's defense. The video that had initially gone viral had caught the attention of animal lovers and trainers alike, and slowly, a community of supporters began to rise up around him. Some were professional trainers who had been quietly practicing their own variations of Noah's methods. Others were everyday people who had always believed that animals deserved a different kind of treatment. They started posting their own videos, sharing their own stories of how they had connected with their animals through gentleness and understanding. They used Noah's example as proof that the way forward was not through domination, but through connection. Noah didn't know it at the time, but his viral moment was just the beginning. What had started as a single act of connection had sparked a larger movement, a movement of people who believed that animals were not mere subjects to be controlled, but beings with whom we could form deep, meaningful relationships. The critics were loud, but Noah's supporters were growing louder, and Noah, though overwhelmed by it all, found himself more determined than ever to continue his mission. He wasn't looking for fame. He wasn't looking for validation. He was looking for something much more important, a world where animals and humans could coexist, not as masters and servants, but as equals, bound together by the trust and respect. It was a week after the viral video of Noah Clark, and Shadow had taken the internet by storm. The debates, both in support and against him, were still raging across social media. His inbox was flooded with messages from curious onlookers, animal lovers, and critics alike. But it wasn't the messages from strangers or the constant online noise that kept him awake at night. It was the question of what came next. What was the next step in his journey? Noah had never asked for fame. He never sought the limelight. His heart had always been with the animals, and his connection to them was something deeply personal, something he didn't feel the need to explain to the world. But now, after the viral video, the world was asking him to do just that. One morning, while Noah sat at his desk, sorting through emails and messages, a particular envelope caught his attention. It was an elegant letter, the kind that only came from places of importance. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the sender's name, Dr. Nia Mwangi, renowned animal behaviorist, Kenya. Noah opened the letter carefully, his curiosity piqued. Dear Mr. Clark, I am writing to you on behalf of the Save Our Elephants Foundation in Kenya. We have been following your incredible work with horses, and we're deeply moved by your connection with Shadow. I believe that your unique approach to animal communication, particularly your understanding of the power of silence and patience, could have a profound impact on our work with elephants who have been traumatized by poaching. These elephants, many of whom have been rescued from devastating circumstances, have not trusted humans in years. They need someone who can approach them with the same gentleness and understanding that you exhibited with Shadow. We would like to formally invite you to work with us in Kenya. We are looking for someone who believes, as we do, that healing can only occur when trust is built, not forced. If you are interested in this opportunity, we would be honored to have you join us in the beautiful wilds of Kenya. Looking forward to hearing from you, Dr. Nia Mwangi. Noah sat back in his chair, staring at the letter in disbelief. He had always dreamed of doing more, of reaching beyond the small town of Westridge and making a difference on a larger scale. But he never imagined that it would happen like this. The invitation from Dr. Mwangi, one of the most respected animal behaviorists in the world, was a dream come true, and it was an opportunity to take the work he had started with Shadow and apply it to something even bigger. Something that could truly change lives. His mind raced with possibilities. Elephants. Elephants who had been traumatized by the horrors of poaching. He knew the statistics. He knew how many elephants had been killed for their ivory, how many had been orphaned, left to wander alone in a world that had robbed them of their families. He couldn't ignore the weight of the responsibility, but at the same time, he couldn't turn down the chance to help, to use his method, his silent, compassionate approach, to heal and rebuild trust with these magnificent creatures. Noah's heart told him that this was the right path. He had always known that the road ahead would be challenging, but this felt different. This was a challenge he couldn't ignore. And so, after a few moments of reflection, Noah made his decision. He wrote back to Dr. Mwangi, expressing his gratitude and acceptance of the invitation. The letter was simple, but it carried the weight of a dream being realized. Dear Dr. Mwangi, thank you for your kind invitation to work with your team in Kenya. I am deeply honored by the opportunity and would be thrilled to accept. I believe that animals, no matter their size or the trauma they have endured, have the capacity for healing if given the right support and understanding. I look forward to meeting the elephants and working alongside your incredible team to see how my approach might help them. I will be ready to join you soon. Best regards, Noah Clark. With the letter sent, Noah felt a wave of calm settle over him. The next chapter of his life was beginning to unfold, and he was ready for it. He shared the news with his grandfather, who was just as thrilled as Noah had hoped. Though the old man had always encouraged him to follow his instincts, even he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the scale of Noah's journey. This wasn't just about horses anymore. It was about something much bigger. But as much as Noah was looking forward to this new adventure, there was something else weighing heavily on his mind. Shadow. The stallion had been with him since that first day in the pen, and while Noah knew that he couldn't stay in Westridge forever, parting from the horse wasn't going to be easy. Noah's grandfather, sensing his grandson's hesitation, placed a hand on his shoulder. You're doing the right thing, Noah. You know that, right? This is what you've always been meant to do. Help the animals who need it the most. Noah nodded, though his heart still ached at the thought of leaving Shadow behind. I know, Grandpa. I feel like I'm leaving something behind, something important. You're not leaving anything behind, his grandfather replied with a reassuring smile. You're just taking what you've learned and sharing it with the world. The next few days passed quickly as Noah prepared for his journey. The thought of working with elephants in Kenya, of bringing his quiet, compassionate methods to a new species, filled him with a sense of purpose. But even as he packed his bags and made plans, part of him stayed with Shadow. The stallion had chosen him once before. Would he be able to leave that connection behind? On the day of his departure, as he stood in the open field behind his house, Noah looked out over the landscape. His grandfather stood beside him, his weathered face smiling in the warm sun. And then, as if on cue, Shadow appeared on the horizon. The stallion moved toward them at a steady pace, his dark form silhouetted against the setting sun. Noah walked toward the horse, his heart swelling with emotion. He extended a hand, and Shadow, as if sensing the weight of the moment, lowered his head in silent understanding. For a moment Noah stood there, hand on Shadow's neck, the connection between them as strong as ever. "I'll be back," Noah whispered, though he wasn't sure if Shadow understood. "We'll both be back." With one last look at the horse, Noah turned and boarded the plane that would take him to Kenya. The journey had only just begun. The airplane touched down in Kenya under a blazing sun. Noah had never seen a landscape quite like this before. The air was thick with the scent of wild grasses, and the distant mountains seemed to rise out of the horizon like ancient guardians. Everything was vast, untouched, and alive with possibility. Yet, as awe-inspiring as the view was, Noah's thoughts were firmly focused on the task ahead. He had come to work with elephants, some of the most majestic creatures on Earth, but also some of the most scarred, their bodies marked by the ravages of poaching and human conflict. These elephants had seen the worst of what humanity had to offer, and now they needed someone who could teach them to trust again. And Noah, with his quiet and unassuming methods, had been chosen to help them heal. The moment Noah stepped off the plane, he was greeted by Dr. Nia Mwangi, the woman who had invited him. Her presence was calming, a steady force that seemed to draw strength from the land itself. She had a warmth about her, yet there was a depth to her gaze that spoke of years spent working with animals in some of the most challenging conditions. "Welcome to Kenya, Noah," she said with a smile, shaking his hand firmly. "We're so glad you're here." "I'm glad to be here," Noah replied, his voice soft, but filled with purpose. The team at the Save Our Elephants Foundation led Noah to the center where the elephants were kept. The area was vast, a sprawling open space filled with towering trees, winding rivers, and thick, wild grass. It was the kind of place that seemed to breathe, to pulse with life. But in the midst of all this beauty was something darker. The trauma of the elephants, visible in the guarded way they moved, the wariness in their eyes. Noah's heart ached as he watched them from a distance. These were not the same majestic creatures he had read about. In books, or seen in documentaries, these were animals who had been pushed to their limits. Their bodies bore scars from poachers' traps, their spirits fractured by violence. They had been through more than any animal should have to endure. Dr. Mwangi led Noah to a large enclosure where a young elephant, Tambo, was being kept. Tambo was only a few years old, but his eyes betrayed a history far older than his age. He had been rescued after his family was killed by poachers, and since then he had shown no trust in humans. He would retreat to the farthest corner of the enclosure whenever anyone approached, his body stiff with fear, his ears flattened in submission. "This is Tambo," Dr. Mwangi said softly, as if speaking too loudly might break the fragile silence between them. "He's been here for nearly a year, and he's made very little progress. He's terrified of humans, but I believe that if anyone can reach him, it's you." Noah nodded, understanding the challenge that lay ahead. He had worked with horses before, but this was something completely different. If elephants were not just larger versions of horses, they had their own language, their own emotional intelligence, and their own ways of processing trauma. But Noah wasn't intimidated. He knew that, just like Shadow, Tambo was a creature who could be reached, not by force, but by understanding. For the first few days, Noah observed Tambo from a distance. He spent hours sitting quietly by the enclosure, not making any sudden movements, just watching the young elephant as he wandered around nervously. Tambo would occasionally glance toward Noah, his eyes filled with suspicion, but Noah remained calm, unshaken. He knew that healing couldn't be rushed. On the third day, Noah decided it was time to try something different. He approached the fence slowly, keeping his body language relaxed and non-threatening. Tambo immediately retreated to the farthest corner of the enclosure, his large ears flicking nervously. Noah didn't move closer. He simply stopped and sat down in the dirt, his posture open and nonchalant. The hours stretched on, but Noah didn't budge. He simply waited. The sun was beginning to set. casting long shadows across the savanna, when Noah felt a shift in the air. Tambo, still at the far side of the enclosure, stopped his pacing. For a long moment, the two of them simply stared at each other. No words, no sounds, just an unspoken connection. Slowly, cautiously, Tambo took a few steps closer. His body was still tense, but he wasn't running away. Noah held his breath, not wanting to startle the young elephant. He stayed perfectly still. And then, after what felt like an eternity, Tambo lowered his head slightly, a small, tentative gesture of trust. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make Noah's heart swell. The young elephant had made the first move. He had chosen to acknowledge Noah, to take the first step toward healing. Over the next few days, Noah continued his quiet work with Tambo, in that he didn't force anything, he didn't try to rush the process. Instead, he spent hours sitting with the elephant, just being present, just showing that he was there to listen, not to control. Tambo, over time, began to approach him more and more. The elephant's movements were still cautious, but his fear was slowly starting to fade. Noah also began to use a technique he had perfected with horses, a gentle, calming touch. With Shadow, he had learned that even the slightest movement, the smallest gesture of kindness, could have a profound impact. And with Tambo, the same was proving true. As Noah gently touched the elephant's trunk, he could feel the young elephant's body relax, the tension melting away. It wasn't a sudden transformation, but it was progress. A slow, steady, undeniable shift toward trust. It was during one of these quiet moments that Tambo made the biggest breakthrough. Noah, sitting on a log near the enclosure, felt a soft, warm sensation on his shoulder. He turned to find Tambo's trunk resting lightly against him. The young elephant, still wary, was allowing Noah to be near him, to touch him, and in that simple moment, Noah felt something profound, the beginning of a bond that had once seemed impossible. Tambo wasn't fully healed yet. He still had a long way to go, but Noah knew that healing wasn't something that could be rushed or forced. It was something that had to be earned, step by step, moment by moment. And with every quiet gesture, every moment of trust, Noah knew he was getting closer to helping Tambo and the other elephants find their way back from the trauma that had stolen their peace. As the days passed, Noah's work with Tambo began to draw the attention of the other elephants. They watched from a distance, curious but hesitant. Yet, as they saw Tambo slowly come to trust Noah, they too seemed to begin their own slow journeys toward healing. Noah's methods, once considered unconventional, were starting to show the world that trust could be rebuilt, even in the most broken of creatures. The sun had set, casting a golden glow over the vast savanna, and the cool evening breeze carried with it the earthy scent of the land. The air was peaceful, a stark contrast to the storm that was brewing just beyond the calm horizon. For Noah, it had been another long, rewarding day of working with Tambo and the other elephants. The young elephant had made steady progress in trusting him, but Noah knew that there was still much work to be done. Healing was never an instant process. It took time, patience, and sometimes a bit of luck. That night, as the stars began to blanket the sky, something unusual happened. The stillness of the evening was shattered by the frantic trumpeting of elephants in the distance. Noah's heart skipped a beat. There was panic in the sound. Something had gone terribly wrong. He sprang to his feet, his mind racing as he looked toward the horizon, where the noise had come from. His training kicked in, and without thinking, he grabbed his flashlight and raced toward the source of the commotion. Dr. Nia Mwangi and her team were already on the move. She and the others had been staying nearby, part of the Save Our Elephants team, and they knew this land better than anyone. But even they couldn't have predicted what they would find. As they reached the heart of the commotion, Noah saw it immediately. Tambo was caught in a trap. His large, strong leg was caught in a poacher's snare, a metal loop digging deeply into his skin. The young elephant was thrashing in pain, the sound of his trumpets filled with terror and desperation. The once calm creature who had begun to trust Noah was now panicking, his body trembling with fear. His eyes were wide with distress, and his usual movements were erratic. The situation had escalated quickly, and in a heartbeat, the peaceful sanctuary they had been building was shattered. Noah's heart sank as he ran to the trap, his mind racing for a solution. He had seen the damage these traps could do before. The metal was sharp and unforgiving, and as Tambo struggled, the more he fought, the deeper the snare would cut into his leg. It was a race against time. If they didn't act fast, Tambo could lose his leg, or worse, his life. The team immediately began to assess the situation. Dr. Mwangi was in charge, instructing her rangers to get tranquilizers ready. But Noah knew that tranquilizing Tambo might be too risky. The stress of the situation, combined with the drugs, could cause irreversible damage. They needed to calm the elephant down first, to keep him still long enough to safely remove the trap. But how? Noah stood still for a moment, his mind searching for a way to reach Tambo. He knew the young elephant's fear was the greatest obstacle. The more Tambo struggled, the more impossible it would be to free him. But if Noah could get close, if he could calm the elephant, maybe, just maybe, they could remove the trap without further harm. Without a word, Noah began to move toward Tambo, his steps slow and deliberate, his breathing steadied, and his mind focused on the one thing he had learned to rely on, his connection with the animals. The world seemed to fade away, the sound of the rangers and their preparations growing distant as Noah locked eyes with Tambo. The young elephant's frantic movements slowed for just a second, and in that second, Noah knew what he had to do. He had no weapons, no tools, no tranquilizers, only his voice, his presence, and his belief in the power of silence. Noah spoke softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tambo, it's okay. You're safe. I'm here. Just breathe, little one." He moved closer, his eyes never leaving Tambo's. The elephant's body was tense, his breathing heavy and erratic. But Noah remained calm, not rushing, not forcing the animal to trust him. He simply waited, allowing the space between them to shrink until he was close enough to touch Tambo's trunk. The elephant snorted and stamped his feet, but Noah remained grounded. He kept his voice low, soothing, the same quiet cadence he had used with Shadow, the same steady rhythm that had helped him connect with so many animals before. Minutes passed, but to Noah, it felt like hours. The rangers stood at a distance, unsure of what to do, but Noah knew that the key was not in moving quickly, but in moving with intention. He had to prove to Tambo that he was not a threat, that he was there to help, not to harm. And then it happened. Tambo's frantic movements began to slow. His wide, fearful eyes softened as he focused on Noah. For the first time since the trap had ensnared him, the young elephant stopped thrashing. His body relaxed, and the tension that had been running through his muscles slowly began to fade. The elephant's breathing steadied, and he allowed Noah to gently touch his leg, just above the trap. Noah felt a surge of relief, but there was no time to waste. The rangers, seeing that Tambo was now calm enough to handle, moved in quickly to free him from the trap. As they worked, Noah stayed by Tambo's side, continuing to speak softly, offering him reassurance. It was a delicate operation, but thanks to Noah's quiet intervention, the team was able to safely remove the snare. Tambo's leg was badly bruised, but there was no major damage. He would recover, though it would take time. The young elephant stood slowly, his massive form still shaky from the ordeal, but his trust in Noah had deepened in those few moments of quiet connection. As Tambo took his first tentative steps away from the scene, Noah remained at his side. The team watched in awe as the elephant, once terrified of human touch, now walked beside the boy who had reached him in his darkest moment. It was a moment that would change everything, not just for Tambo, but for Noah as well. He had proven to himself and to everyone around him that the true power of healing came not from force, but from trust, from compassion. The night had indeed changed everything. The storm of panic had passed, and in its wake, Noah had found the strength to heal not just an elephant, but the bond between all living creatures. In that one quiet moment, everything he had believed in had been validated. The road ahead was still long, But Noah now knew that he was on the right path. The days following the night Tambo was freed from the trap seemed to carry with them a sense of quiet triumph. Noah's work in Kenya had never felt so real, so essential. He had arrived with the simple goal of helping the elephants, using his gentle, silent approach to help heal them, and now, after saving Tambo, he could feel the weight of his journey, not in his body, but in his heart. It was the kind of healing that wasn't just for the animals, but for him as well. The bond that had formed between him and the elephants was becoming something unspoken, something deeply rooted in trust and mutual respect. Tambo, the young elephant who had once been terrified of all humans, now followed Noah wherever he went. His cautious steps had slowly become more assured. The trauma that had once defined his existence was beginning to fade, not because of drugs or forceful intervention, but because of the patience and quiet presence that Noah had brought into his life. He no longer looked at humans with fear in his eyes. Instead, there was a gentleness there, something Noah had never expected, but now saw as an undeniable truth, that the way forward was not through control, but through kindness. Noah's success with Tambo didn't go unnoticed. Word began to spread through the Save Our Elephants Foundation, and soon more staff members began to take notice of Noah's approach. The skeptics who had doubted his methods initially were starting to soften, watching the progress that Noah had made with Tambo and the other elephants. The young elephants, once so distrustful, and now gathered around him when he entered the enclosure. They were not yet fully healed, but they were learning, little by little, to trust again. But Noah's work wasn't just about the animals. It was also about bridging the divide between people and wildlife. His presence at the foundation was a living testament to the power of compassion. And soon, he was invited to share his methods with a broader audience. The foundation saw an opportunity to spread Noah's message of quiet connection and the importance of patience in ways that went beyond the elephants in the sanctuary. It started with a simple interview. Dr. Mwangi, who had become a mentor to Noah during his time in Kenya, suggested that Noah take part in a documentary project that would showcase the foundation's work, but also highlight his unique approach. The goal was clear: to share Noah's methods with the world, not just to show how they help the elephants, but to encourage others to adopt similar approaches in their own work with animals. The project was titled Whispering the Truth, Healing Through Silence. It would take the world behind the scenes of the Save Our Elephants Foundation, following Noah's journey as he worked with Tambo and the other elephants. The documentary would show Noah's quiet interventions, the way he approached each elephant with patience, trust, and understanding. It would show how he had built connections not just with the elephants, but with the people around him. It was about more than healing animals. It was about changing hearts, changing minds. The documentary filming began with Noah and Tambo in the foreground, though the camera quickly captured the larger impact of his work. The scenes were raw and emotional, showing Noah's interactions with the elephants, the peaceful moments when the young elephants would nuzzle against him, and the stillness that filled the spaces between them. It wasn't a story of flashy training techniques or dramatic victories. It was a story of quiet moments where the true strength came not from overpowering, but from understanding. As the weeks went on, Noah's methods gained traction. The documentary was released to critical acclaim, not just in Kenya, but around the world. It was shared on social media, featured on animal behaviorist forums, and picked up by mainstream news outlets. Experts in the field of animal behavior began to study Noah's methods more closely. They saw the impact his approach had on the elephants, and they began to consider the idea that perhaps the old methods of dominance and control had been too harsh, too outdated. Maybe there was a better way, a way that didn't involve breaking the spirit of the animal, but rather building a relationship based on trust. The ripple effect was swift. The film sparked a global conversation about animal welfare, about the way humans interacted with animals. The hashtag #WhisperingTheTruth trended worldwide. People who had seen the documentary began sharing their own experiences. their own stories of how they had adopted Noah's methods in their work with animals. Trainers, zookeepers, and even pet owners began to understand that connection and trust were the keys to helping animals heal. Noah found himself in the spotlight, though it was a spotlight he hadn't sought. He was invited to speak at conferences, participate in roundtable discussions, and consult on animal welfare projects. Yet, despite all the attention, he remained grounded. His passion had never been about the recognition. It had always been about the animals. And that was what he held on to as he continued his work. One afternoon, as Noah stood at the edge of the sanctuary, watching the elephants roam freely in the vast open space, he felt a wave of peace wash over him. He had come to Kenya unsure of what he was meant to do, but now, as he looked at the elephants that had been healed by his hands and heart, he knew that he had found his purpose. The journey wasn't just about the animals. It was about showing the world that kindness, patience, and trust could heal even the deepest wounds. Tambo, the young elephant who had once been so fearful, now stood beside him, his large eyes calm and trusting. The bond between them had deepened, and it was clear that their work together was far from over. But now there was a sense of quiet understanding between them, a silent agreement that they were in this together. Tambo had chosen Noah, just as Noah had chosen him. And as Noah stood there, surrounded by the elephants he had helped heal, he knew that this was only the beginning. His whisper had begun as a quiet, solitary call to the animals. But now, that whisper had turned into a wave that was reaching out to touch the hearts of people around the world, inspiring them to see animals not as things to be controlled, but as beings to be respected, understood, and loved. The sun was setting on the wide expanse of the savannah, casting a soft, orange glow over the horizon. The air was cool, the kind of quiet stillness that only came at the end of a long day. Noah Clark stood at the edge of the field, his eyes scanning the land that had become his home, his purpose, and his calling. The elephants he had helped to heal were grazing peacefully nearby, their enormous forms silhouetted against the fading light. The serenity of the scene was a far cry from the chaos that had once filled Noah's life. But it wasn't just the elephants that had brought him peace. Noah had come to Kenya to help animals in need, to bring his unique approach to healing to a new environment, and to show the world that compassion and trust were more powerful than force and control. But as he stood there, watching the animals in their natural state, he realized that the journey had come full circle. The work he had started with Shadow, the wild stallion he had tamed with nothing but patience and silence, had led him here, led him to this moment of quiet reflection. It had been years since Noah had first met Shadow at the Westridge horse fair, years since the horse had bucked wildly in the pen, earning the reputation of being untamable. Noah had shown up at that fair with no grand plan, no intentions of proving anything. He had simply stepped forward, listened, and trusted that the bond between human and animal could be built on respect, not fear. That day had changed everything for both him and the world that had watched. Noah had gone from a quiet farm boy in rural Wyoming to an internationally recognized animal behaviorist, using his methods to heal not only horses and elephants, but to spark a global movement focused on compassion in animal care. His journey had taken him from the rural plains of Wyoming to the wide-open savannas of Africa, from being a local curiosity to becoming a voice in animal welfare. But despite all the accolades, the media attention, and the invitations to speak around the world, Noah had always remained grounded, always kept his focus on what really mattered, the animals. And now, as he stood at the edge of the field, he felt the weight of all that he had achieved, and the knowledge that there was still so much more to do. He was no longer the boy who had been laughed at for his weird ways. He was a man who had shown the world that the quietest voices could make the loudest impacts. Suddenly, Noah's eyes caught sight of a familiar figure in the distance. A dark, powerful form trotted across the field, its head held high and its hooves beating the earth in a rhythm that was unmistakable. Shadow, the stallion, who had once been known for his wildness and fury, now approached Noah with a calm, almost deliberate pace. It was a sight that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. The untamable horse, now a symbol of trust and companionship, moving toward Noah without hesitation. As Shadow neared, Noah's heart swelled. The bond between them had been forged in silence, in patience, in quiet understanding. He had never broken the horse. He had never dominated him. Instead, he had built a relationship based on trust. And that was what had brought Shadow to him now. Unbridled, unafraid, and willing to stand by his side. Noah walked slowly toward the horse, his footsteps steady and sure. Shadow came to a stop in front of him, his massive form towering over Noah, but there was no fear in the stallion's eyes, only the same quiet trust that had been there from the very beginning. Noah placed a hand gently on Shadow's neck, feeling the warmth of the animal's body beneath his palm. For a moment, everything else faded away. The world, the challenges, the journey. It all seemed to disappear in that simple, sacred moment between man and horse. Noah smiled softly, his gaze lingering on the stallion who had once been so wild, so unreachable. "You've come a long way, haven't you?" he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. "We both have." The connection between them was deep, a silent understanding that went beyond words. Shadow stood beside Noah without the need for a bridle, without any commands or requests. The stallion had chosen to follow him, not because he was forced to, but because he trusted Noah. It was a trust that had been earned, not through domination, but through respect, patience, and love. As Noah stood there, with Shadow by his side, he realized that this moment was the culmination of everything he had worked for. It wasn't about fame or recognition or even the accolades. It was about the quiet victories, the small, seemingly insignificant moments that built something far greater than anyone could have imagined. The trust between man and animal, the healing of broken spirits, the understanding that had bridged the gap between two very different worlds. The elephants, the horses, the dogs. Each one had taught him something new. Each one had shown him that the key to healing wasn't found in dominance, but in kindness. The real strength, he had learned, lay in listening, in being present, in understanding that the strongest force wasn't control, but compassion. And that, in the end, was what Noah had to offer the world. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the savanna in soft shadows, Noah knew that this was just the beginning. There would always be more animals to help, more work to be done. But as he stood with Shadow by his side, he knew that he was on the right path. The whisper that had started so many years ago in Wyoming had become a wave that was sweeping across the world, changing hearts and minds one animal at a time. Noah didn't need a grand gesture or a loud declaration. All he needed was the quiet trust of the animals, and the knowledge that, in the end, compassion would always be the loudest voice in the room. With Shadow by his side, Noah smiled and turned, ready to continue the journey. They had come full circle, and the road ahead was as vast and full of promise as the endless savanna stretching before them.